Good morrow, good listeners, and welcome back to Shakespeare, the podcast where we explore how Shakespeare lives, breathes, and occasionally reinvents himself in the culture around us. I'm your host, Koel Chatterjee, and this month we're doing something a little different. We're placing Taylor Swift in conversation with William Shakespeare. Not because they are interchangeable cultural figures, and certainly not because one replaces the other, but because the way we read them might be more historically continuous than we tend to acknowledge. Before we dive in, though, a quick note. If you've noticed that things have been a little quieter than usual around Shakespeare recently, it's because May brought a series of family health emergencies involving both my son and my mother. At the same time, the stress and anxiety of the situation left me navigating a period of autistic burnout, which, if I'm honest, has been building since February. I'm grateful to be back behind the microphone, however, and I'm very grateful that you're here listening. So, I want to begin not with an argument, but with two lines. You kept me like a secret, but I kept you like an oath, from All Too Well. And, oh, swear not by the moon, the inconstant moon, from Romeo and Juliet. What interests me here is not simply that both lines are about love. Shakespeare and Swift are hardly unique in that regard. What interests me is the anxiety both lines carry about language itself. Swift gives us two kinds of keeping. A secret is hidden, unevenly held, something concealed. An oath, meanwhile, is public, binding, performative. So, before we even know the details of the relationship, the line has already established an imbalance. One person conceals while the other commits. Juliet is wrestling with something remarkably similar. She's not rejecting love when she tells Romeo not to swear by the moon. She is rejecting unstable language. The moon changes. It shifts shape. It performs inconsistency. And Juliet fears that promises may do the same. Both moments are suspicious of declarations. Both ask whether words can ever truly secure permanence. And what we as audiences are doing in response is not simply recognizing emotion. We're interpreting metaphor, symbolism, implication, and performance. We are reading for clues. In other words, we're already doing the work of criticism. Because perhaps the most interesting question is not whether Taylor Swift is the new Shakespeare, but whether Swift's audiences reveal something about how Shakespeare has always been read, and more importantly, how he continues to be remade. Let me stay with this idea of intimacy for a moment. One of the reasons Taylor Swift's music generates such intense analysis is because it creates the sensation of confession. The lyrics often feel diaristic, immediate, and almost unfiltered. I've never been a natural. All I do is try, try, try. That's from Mirrorball, from Folklore. The line sounds vulnerable. It invites us to believe we're hearing something authentic and unguarded. Now, place that beside Shakespeare's Sonnet 138. When my love swears that she is made of truth, I do believe her, though I know she lies. Again, we encounter uncertainty around sincerity. The speaker simultaneously believes and disbelieves. Truth becomes performative rather than stable. And yet, culturally, we often insist on reading Swift and Shakespeare differently. Swift is framed as confessional and autobiographical. Shakespeare, meanwhile, is elevated into abstraction, universal, detached, impersonal, safely canonical. But that distinction becomes difficult to sustain when we consider what Michel Foucault describes as the author function. The author, for Foucault, is not simply the person who produced the text. The author becomes a framework through which audiences organize interpretation. Taylor Swift and William Shakespeare are therefore not just historical individuals, or living individuals for that matter, they are interpretive systems. Swift's authenticity is carefully curated. Shakespeare's distance is equally constructed. Both figures cultivate a relationship between revelation and concealment. They invite audiences to feel close to the text while never fully surrendering control over meaning. And crucially, both depend upon audiences who are willing, even eager, to search beneath the surface. Swift's listeners do not simply consume songs, they decode them. Within minutes of an album release, TikTok fills with slowed down audio clips, lyric annotations, screenshots, connected with arrows and timestamps, theories built around colors, clothing, dates, or recurring imagery. A scarf becomes evidence. A key becomes narrative infrastructure. A single lyric becomes a theory waiting to be collectively assembled. What emerges is not passive listening, but collaborative interpretation. And while that can feel uniquely digital, it is worth remembering that Shakespeare's audiences were hardly passive themselves. Early modern theatre demanded interpretive fluency. Audiences were attuned to rhetorical performance, classical allusion, political implication, religious tension, sexual innuendo. Shakespeare's plays were layered texts designed for audiences capable of recognizing what lay beneath the surface. More importantly, interpretation was social. It happened collectively. We can see traces of this in early modern diaries and records of performance. Samuel Pepys famously described A Midsummer Night's Dream as the most insipid, ridiculous play that I saw in my life. That quotation is often repeated because it is funny and unexpectedly brutal. But what matters is not whether Pepys was correct. What matters is that he was participating in criticism. He was evaluating performance, constructing taste, deciding what theatre should do. Similarly, John Manningham's 1602 diary entry on Twelfth Night focuses specifically on the gulling of Malvolio. Not the play as a whole, just that moment, which tells us something crucial about audience behavior. Early modern spectators were already selecting, curating, and circulating the parts of Shakespeare that mattered most to them. If Swifties build theories through TikTok edits and Reddit threads, Shakespeare's audiences built meaning through conversation, correspondence, memory, and performance culture. The difference is not the desire to decode. The difference is the infrastructure. And this is where the work of Henry Jenkins becomes especially useful. Jenkins argues that audiences are not passive consumers of media, but active participants in meaning making. Fans do not merely receive texts, they transform them, circulate them, build communities around them. Abigail D. Kosnick pushes this idea even further by describing fandom itself as a form of cultural archiving. Swifties do not simply interpret songs, they preserve interpretation. They document theories, annotate references, catalogue performances, and create massive digital repositories of collective meaning. Interpretation becomes cumulative, iterative, communal. And once we begin thinking this way, Shakespeare starts to look less like a distant monument and more like part of a much longer history of participatory fandom. This is where global Shakespeare scholarship becomes particularly illuminating. Alexa Alice Jubin argues that Shakespeare does not exist as a singular stable text, but as a series of adaptations and recontextualizations moving across cultures, media, and histories. Meaning emerges through circulation. Similarly, Louise Geddes and Valerie Faisal describe Shakespeare as a multiverse, something which I've referred to before. A network of coexisting interpretations that resist being reduced into a single authoritative version. Seen in this light, Swift's work begins to resemble not a cultural anomaly, but a continuation of something much older. Her songs do not remain fixed. They accumulate meaning as they move through audiences. Every performance changes context. Every re-recording reframes narrative. Every fan theory creates another layer of interpretation. Swift does not simply release songs. She builds a multiverse as well. Perhaps this is why Taylor Swift courses appearing in several universities now feel simultaneously surprising and entirely inevitable. The public debate around these courses often centers on legitimacy. Is this serious literature? Does Swift belong in the classroom? But perhaps the more interesting question is what kind of reading these courses make visible. Students engaging with Swift are already practicing forms of literary analysis. They identify motifs, track intertextuality, construct arguments, contextualize texts historically and culturally. and debate competing interpretations. In other words, they're already doing the work we ask of Shakespeare students. Teaching Swift alongside Shakespeare does not dilute literary study. It exposes its underlying mechanics. It reminds us that literature is not merely about preserving great texts, but about sustaining communities of interpretation around them. And if you're listening right now, wondering whether that Taylor Swift lyric really does sound a little like Juliet, then congratulations, you're participating in the process too. Of course, there's also a danger in hyperinterpretation. The invitation to decode can quickly become an obligation to decode. Not every lyric is an Easter egg. Not every ambiguity is intentional. Swift sustains this tension deliberately. She invites interpretation while withholding confirmation. Meaning remains partially unresolved and permanently deferred. And Shakespeare does much the same. Centuries of scholarship have not stabilized Shakespeare's plays, they have multiplied them. Every adaptation, every production, every classroom discussion generates another possible Shakespeare. So, what emerges from this comparison is not a hierarchy between high and popular culture, but a continuum of audience participation. We do not simply inherit Shakespeare, we build him, line by line, performance by performance, interpretation by interpretation. And Taylor Swift? Swift simply makes that process visible. Swift does not replace Shakespeare, she reveals the reader at the center of both. Before we close, a quick reminder that if you'd like more discussions like this, you can subscribe to the Shakespop Substack for companion essays, behind-the-scenes notes, and a few extra layers of analysis that don't always make it into the main episode when I'm planning them. And if you're enjoying the podcast, I'd really appreciate a rating or review wherever you listen. Shakespop is still very much an independent project, and every review genuinely helps new listeners discover the show. And one final thing. To accompany this episode, I've also put together a curated Spotify playlist called the Secret Shakespeare Playlist. This goes beyond Taylor Swift. It gathers songs from across genres: pop, indie, rock, folk, songs that reference Shakespeare directly, borrow his characters, or reimagine his stories in surprising ways. Think of it as a kind of listening archive, a map of Shakespeare's afterlives in contemporary music. And finally, I'd love to hear from you. Which Taylor Swift lyric feels like part of the Shakespeare multiverse to you? And how would you read it? Is there another author that you think writes songs that are reminiscent of Shakespeare? Let me know via email, social media, get in touch. I always like discussing Shakespearean pop culture. I hope you enjoyed listening to me as much as I've enjoyed speaking with you.